In this lesson, we're going to begin to discuss strokes. If you'd like to follow along, go under the File menu to Open, and in the Sample Files folder, scroll down to 1305-1306 Stroke Secrets and just click Open. Let's run through some of the basics of the stroke panel. You can click the stroke panel to open it. If you're not in the typography workspace, make sure to choose it from the pop-up. Why don't we go to our selection tool, the black arrow, and click on the green stroke. Why don't we start by talking about weight? That's how thick the stroke is. If I click my up arrow, the stroke in the selected object will get thicker and thicker and thicker, one point at a time. If I click my down arrow, of course, the weight is going to become less. I also have these double arrows to the right of the field. If I click, I can select one of the presets to make a big change very quickly. The next section of the stroke panel is called cap. By default, the stroke has a butt cap. That means the end of the stroke is butting up against the end of the path. The next cap, a round cap, will actually add to the end of the path, making the end round. It's adding a semicircle to the end of the stroke. The next kind of a cap is called a projecting cap. If I click on that, it's adding half the width of the weight to the end of the stroke. Well, why would I ever want to do that? Why don't we go to our zoom tool? You can hit your Z key to get there very quickly. And I'm just going to click and drag across these magenta colored strokes down the lower right hand corner of my page. And I'm going to go to my selection tool and just click and drag across the two strokes. And they are two strokes. They're not connected in the corner. But what if I wanted to make them look like they were connected? If I add a projecting cap to each one of those strokes in those two separate segments, it fills in the little corner. It makes it look like a mitered picture frame. So it comes to a point and gets rid of that little white square. Let me go back to projecting cap and go to my direct selection tool. I'm going to click on one of the endpoints and just drag this over. And you can see the projecting cap is what is filling in that little corner. Let me hit Command or Control Z, and now select both of these again and make it a butt cap. And you can see big difference. Let me zoom out and fit my page, Command or Control 0. I'm going to select the square in the lower left-hand corner and just zoom in a bit so we can see what's going on. And with my selection tool, I'm going to select the object and I'm going to change what's called the join. By default, it's using something called a mitered join, which is kind of like a picture frame. It comes to a point in each of the corners. I can also round the joins, and you can see the outside of the object is rounded in the corners. I can also bevel off those corners if I use a bevel join. But what is miter limit? What is that about? Let me go back to a miter join. I'm going to zoom out again to fit my artboard in the window and select this zigzag object. Right now, all of these are points, and some of the points are getting kind of long. Well, the purpose of miter limit is to make sure that those points don't get too long. Let me click my down arrow, and you can see some of the points are getting cut off now. If I continue clicking my down arrow, eventually all of the points will be gone. Well, let me go back up. It doesn't seem to have any effect as I get much larger than 4. Well, what is that about? Let me go back down to 4. Miter limit, if you actually read the number in the field and the little time sign after it, that's what the key to understanding miter limit is all about. It's 4 times whatever the weight is. Anytime one of these points becomes bigger than 64 points, 4 times 16, it will cut it off. So if I lower that limit, it starts cutting off any points that are greater than 3 times the weight. If I continue lowering the limit, it's going to cut off more points because they're greater than 2 times the weight. So that's what miter limit is all about. Why don't we select our square in the lower left-hand corner again and talk about a line stroke. By default, half of the stroke is inside of an object and half of it is outside of the object. If I click a line stroke to inside, the entire stroke is now to the inside of the object. Well, why would I ever need to do this? Well, if the outside dimensions of an object, of a stroke, are what's important to me, like let's say it's the border of an ad, and the outside of that border has to be a certain amount, because that's the size of the ad, I would always use a line stroke to inside. That way, if I have to make the weight of the stroke less or greater, it's going to have no effect on the outside dimensions. A line stroke to outside is just the opposite. If the interior dimensions of my square are what's most important to me, I would align the stroke to the outside. So my white space inside of this object will not change if I decrease the weight or increase the weight. Why don't we select our green stroke again and talk about the different types of strokes that are available. If you click on the type pop-up, you'll see that there's things like thick, thick, and thick, thin. And let me go a little bit further, a triple. Or go down a little bit further, there's different kinds of dashes. And there's hash marks. Various kinds of dots. And wavy lines. So there's a huge variety of different types of strokes that are available right in the type pop-up. Now, right under that in the panel, it says Start and End. But before I get there, let me change the type of stroke back to a solid stroke. Now, if I click down on Start and add a curved arrow, you can see it's adding an arrow to the end. This is kind of a thick stroke. Let me make it a lot thinner. That's better. I can also add an arrow or a circle or a square to the other end of a stroke. But the question is, how do I know what is the start and what is the end of the path? Well, the start is wherever you clicked first. Wherever you finished drawing your path is the end. I don't know about you, but I don't remember where I clicked first about 5 seconds after I clicked. So one of the things that you're going to find is sometimes you're going to have to add your arrow to the opposite end. Let me get rid of my arrow. I'm going to go back to none, and I'm going to go to a different type of stroke. How about a triple? And I'm going to make it a lot thicker. So I'm going to increase the weight to like 30. Now, I can add a color to the gap between my triple strokes. All I have to do is click on the gap color pop-up, and I can pick any color that is saved in my swatches panel. So if I choose, let's say, cyan, you can see it's getting filled in with cyan. Now, let me make the cap a butt cap. I can also tint the gap color. Let me go down to about 50%. We're going to continue discussing strokes in the next lesson.